She smirked at the briefcase before she ever looked at the man holding it. Corinne Holloway crossed 40 feet of white marble in 11 seconds flat, heels striking stone like a clock running fast, and put herself squarely between the man and the executive elevators. Her palm landed flat against the brushed steel doors. Then her eyes traveled down, slow and deliberate, to the briefcase in his right hand. Oxblood leather, soft and scuffed at every corner. A brass clasp held shut with a strip of black electrical tape. One seam was stitched twice over in a thread that did not match. One corner of her mouth lifted and stayed lifted, and she said, "The service entrance is on Canal Street. Whatever you are delivering, somebody down there will sign for it." The man did not move. He was tall, gray at the temples, wearing a coat that had been a good coat 10 years ago. "I have a 9 o'clock. She laughed once, a short sound, then raised her phone and held it sideways at his face. Behind her, 2 guards started across the lobby floor. A loan officer stopped walking to watch. Near the coffee cart, a woman slowly lowered her cup. Corinne lifted her voice so the whole atrium could hear it, and she said, "Sir, you are going to open that bag, or you are going to open it for the police. Your choice." The revolving door turned. A woman in a gray suit came through it with a state badge swinging from a lanyard, and behind her came 4 people carrying flattened file boxes. Before this story moves one step further, do something for the man you just watched. Stand perfectly still in that lobby. Drop your city in the comments, because what happened to him happens in every one of them. And if you believe quiet people deserve their moment, subscribe and ring the bell. You are going to want to know what that worn briefcase was carrying. The day begins at 10 minutes past 6 in a narrow kitchen on the north side of Richmond with a wristwatch that belongs to someone who is gone. Ellis Haynes lifts it from the windowsill above the sink, a Hamilton with a cream face and a leather band worn down to the color of weak tea, and he winds it 14 turns. Never 13, never 15. He sets it back on the sill with its face toward the window, where the first light can find it. Then he fills the kettle, starts the oatmeal, and lets the house wake up around him in its usual small noises. The watch was Renata's. It still keeps perfect time. He has never once put it on his own wrist. Nova comes downstairs at 6:48 years old, wearing one sock, hauling a sketchbook nearly the size of her torso. She climbs onto the second stool, opens the book to a half-finished drawing of a heron, and begins to hum. No particular song, just a low, wandering thread of sound that climbs when the pencil moves fast and sinks when she leans in close to repair a line. Her mother hummed in exactly that way, bent over 400-year-old paper in the conservation lab at the Library of Virginia, and the first time Nova did it, 3 weeks after the funeral, Ellis had to walk out of the room and stand in the hallway with his hand pressed flat against the wall. Now he only listens. He cuts a clementine into 6 pieces, drops 2 fig bars into a paper sack, writes the letter N on the fold, and slides a bowl of oatmeal across the counter to her. She eats with the pencil still in her hand. He drinks his coffee standing up. That is the entire ceremony of their morning, and neither one of them would trade a minute of it. By 7:15 they are in the car, a gray 2009 Crown Victoria bought at a state auction with 180,000 miles on it and a spotlight hole in the driver's door plugged with rubber. Nova calls it the boat. The heater needs 9 full minutes before it means anything it says. At the corner of Brookland Park Boulevard, she offers him a fact about herons, that their necks fold the way a letter folds because of one special bone, and he tells her that is the kind of a fact that wins arguments, and she nods like a professional accepting a fair review. He drops her at Patrick Henry Elementary at 7:40. She walks in without looking back. She used to look back. He has decided that her not looking back is a good sign, and on most days he manages to believe it. Then he drives to work, and his work is a strange and patient thing. Ellis Haynes reads paper the way other people read faces. He is a forensic document examiner. For 12 years, he carried casework in the questioned documents section of the state lab Out on Midlothian Turnpike, wills and ransom notes and altered checks, ink studied under infrared, hidden indentations raised with electrostatic film, the loop of one forged letter compared against 300 genuine ones until the lie inside it finally stood up and showed itself. 9 years ago, he went out on his own, one desk, one microscope older than his marriage, a scanner the size of a chest freezer, a client list of lawyers and estates, and, far more often than anyone realizes, the office of the Attorney General of Virginia. The work is slow, and it is silent, and it punishes impatience without mercy. A document never confesses. It simply waits for someone to notice. Ellis once gave 11 months of his life to a single sheet of paper, a will dated 1974 that had taken a farm in Dinwiddie County, away from a widow named Eunice Tatum, and in the end he broke it open with two findings no bigger than a comma. The iron gall ink on the signature line had not existed in 1974, and the typewriter that produced the body of the text dropped the serif on its capital T, a flaw belonging to a machine that was not even purchased until 1981. Mrs. Tatum got her farm back at 86 years old. Every August until she died, she sent him a bushel of Hanover tomatoes. The note that came with the first bushel is still in a frame inside a drawer, because hanging it on a wall would have meant explaining it to visitors. That is the shape of the man. The proof goes in the file. The note goes in the drawer. He met Renata in 2011 over a damaged deed book in the basement of the Library of Virginia, where she was lifting 2 centuries of mold off county records with a brush about the width of an eyelash. She watched the way he handled the volume, cotton gloves, a book cradle, no hurry anywhere in him, and she told him that most investigators handled paper like it owed them money. 14 months later, they were married. Nova arrived 2 years after that in a thunderstorm, 8 days early, impatient in a way neither parent could ever explain. Renata died on a Tuesday in March 3 years ago. An aneurysm at her bench at work, between one breath and the next one that never came. The doctors said nothing could have been done, and Ellis has spent 3 years deciding daily to believe them. There were no last words. There was a half-conserved map of Henrico County on her bench, and her watch on her wrist, and that is the whole inheritance. Her colleagues finished the map, and it hangs now in a reading room beside a small card carrying her name. The watch sits on a windowsill, wound every morning 14 turns. What nobody sees, at school pickup or in the lobby of a marble tower, is everything else. The commendation letters in a folder he never opens. The cold case unit in Norfolk that calls him whenever a confession smells wrong. The afternoon a federal prosecutor stood in his office doorway and used the word irreplaceable, and Ellis changed the subject to parking. The man drives an old car, carries an old briefcase, packs fig bars into a paper sack, and the true record of what he has done sits quietly in courthouses all over the state, where you would only ever find it if you already knew to look. The briefcase was his father's. Albert Haynes carried it for 31 years as a railway clerk, and the brass clasp stuck for at least 20 of those years. Ellis has paid a shoe shop on Hull Street to repair the stitching twice and has never once fixed the clasp, because his father never fixed the clasp, and some things you inherit, flaws and all, on purpose. For the past 3 weeks, that briefcase has been riding into downtown Richmond every single morning, into the lobby of a tower at 511 East Carey Street, 31 stories of green glass with one name across the top in steel letters. Halloway. Corinne Halloway built that name the hard way, and she will tell you so, though she has trained herself to wait until somebody asks. She grew up in Hopewell, downwind of the paper mill, in a house where keeping the electricity on was a monthly negotiation. Her father pressed transmission seals for 30 years and came home every night smelling of solvent. She put herself through 2 years of community college, doing payroll for a plumbing contractor, took a receptionist job at a commercial leasing office in 1987, and understood within 6 months that she was smarter than every man whose calls she was answering. By 1994, she owned that office. By 2009, the company was assembling and developing property in 4 states. By the time those steel letters went up over East Carey Street, Corinne Holloway had spent more than half her life making absolutely certain that nobody would ever again look at her and see Hopewell. That is the key to her, because it explains everything she does and excuses none of it. The marble lobby is not decoration, it is armor. Every polished surface in that building is one more sentence in an argument she has been making since she was 19, and the argument is simple. I belong here. On Sundays, she calls her grandson Theo in Charlotte and lets him explain Minecraft to her for 40 minutes, and she takes notes so she can ask him questions that prove she listened, and her assistant has standing orders that nothing on earth interrupts that call. On her office sill, she keeps 4 orchids and waters them herself with a copper can, Mondays and Thursdays, because her mother kept orchids alive in Hopewell against every odd, and Corinne considers it a family discipline. She is, in other words, a person, which makes what follows worse, not better, because for 2 years now, Holloway Property Group has been bleeding from a wound almost nobody can see. A quiet title action filed in Richmond Circuit Court, attacking the company's ownership of the very ground beneath its own headquarters. Somewhere in the chain of title, the plaintiffs claim there is a break, a transfer recorded in 1961 that does not hold up, and the one original deed that could settle the question has been missing for 60 years. Her lawyers have torn through 3 courthouses, 2 state archives, and the surviving records of a defunct abstracting company. Nothing. The litigation has burned through $4 million and is still burning. Her lender has scheduled a review for the Thursday of Investor Week. She has started waking at 3 in the morning with her jaw aching from the clench. And into the middle of all that, 3 weeks ago, walked a man. She noticed him the very first Tuesday. You could not help noticing him, she told Building Services, though what she actually meant was that she could not. A tall black man in a coat 10 years past its best, carrying a ruined leather briefcase across her white marble lobby at 8 in the morning, badging through on a visitor credential down to the sub-basement, where the building's deep records storage runs in caged rows under fluorescent light. Down there for hours at a stretch, boxes open, files out. She asked her facilities director who he was. The answer came back, a contract records vendor, cleared through legal, and that answer sat wrong with her in a way she never paused to examine. She asked which firm. The name meant nothing to her. She asked who in legal had cleared it, and the answer was outside counsel, and the whole matter was described to her, in writing, as routine records inspection, and something down in the bottom of her, something that still carried a Hopewell accent, whispered that people get robbed politely all the time. So it began. Small talk at first, the way these things always begin. In January, she had his parking moved from the visitor garage to a surface lot 2 blocks away. She mentioned him to the security chief twice, both times using the phrase, "keep an eye." When she passed him on the plaza one lunchtime eating a sandwich from a paper sack on the edge of a planter, she slowed her step and looked at him the way a person looks at a stain. He nodded to her. "Good afternoon." She did not answer. That evening, she emailed Building Services about loitering near the planters. In February, it escalated, because pressure always escalates. The lender review moved up. A reporter called asking about the lawsuit, and on the second Friday of the month, Corinne went down to the subbasement herself, security chief in tow, and found Ellis Haynes at a folding table in cage 17, white cotton gloves on his hands, a closing binder from 1987 open in front of him, photographing a page. She planted herself in the cage doorway, which happened to be the only way out, and she did not move from it, and she said, "You are going to pack this up, and Marcus here is going to walk you out, and whoever you actually work for can call me directly." The security chief's name was not Marcus. It was, in fact, Marcus Webb's day off, and the man standing beside her was named Otis Pruitt, and Otis Pruitt looked at the floor. Ellis sat still for a moment. In the left inside pocket of his coat, folded in thirds, was a court order signed by a circuit judge, granting inspection access under seal and directing all inquiries to a phone number that would answer as a records management company. He could have taken it out. He could have ended her whole performance inside 15 seconds. Watched her face change, watched her run the math on him all over again. He thought about the cage door she was standing in. He thought about a man 11 floors above their heads who must never, under any circumstances, learn that the state was down here reading old paper. He packed the binder away with gloved hands, slowly, properly, the way Renata had taught him paper deserves to be handled. He picked up the briefcase with the taped clasp. At the doorway, she did not quite step aside, so that he had to turn his shoulders to get past her, and as he did, her eyes dropped to the briefcase and her mouth curled at one corner, and she said, "They do not pay you enough for a new bag, whoever they are." He paused, one breath long. "It was my father's." Otis Pruitt walked him out to the street and apologized twice without using a single word, the way men do it, with a held door and a handshake that lasted too long. Ellis came back Monday morning on the same credential, because the order said he could, and the watching went on, and the walk from the surface lot 2 blocks away went on, through the rain, through February. He never explained himself. He was not permitted to, and even if he had been, he would not have. Explaining yourself to people who have already decided is just kneeling with extra steps. His father told him that in a railway break room 50 years ago. Now here is what was actually happening all those weeks while Corinne Halloway stared at a briefcase and saw a threat. It was called Operation Quiet Title, and by that February it was 26 months old. It lived in a windowless room on the 4th floor of the office of the Attorney General on East Main Street, inside 11 gray cabinets, and one whiteboard that was photographed and wiped clean every evening before the cleaning crew arrived. It was run by a senior assistant attorney general named Dana Whitfield, a precise woman from Suffolk who kept a jar of lemon candy on her desk for visitors and had worked with Ellis Haynes for 9 years, ever since a probate fraud in Chesterfield that everyone else had walked away from. The case was about deeds. More exactly, it was about a forgery operation running through a firm called Meridian Abstract and Title, founded in 1949, dissolved on paper in 1998, and carried on in practice by the founder's grandson, an attorney named Carl Brandt, whose offices sat in a corner of the 14th floor of the Halloway building, where for 19 years he had served as the company's trusted outside title counsel. The modern scheme was ugly in its simplicity. Brandt's network hunted heirs' property, land handed down through families without formal probate, much of it black-owned, the title clouded just enough to be vulnerable. Then deeds began to appear. Old deeds, beautifully aged, sitting in courthouse books recorded decades earlier, moving the land out of the family long before the living heirs were ever born. The paper was always right. The ink was always right. The families lost in court over and over again, because how does anyone argue with 1961? Ellis could argue with 1961. That was his entire purpose on the task force, and he had been serving it for 26 months, unpaid overtime included, under a contract that listed him as nothing more than a vendor. He had examined 41 deeds drawn from 6 counties. In 19 of them he had found the same hand, a forger's hand, disciplined and patient and properly trained, carrying one habit it could never shed, a microscopic hesitation at the baseline of the capital J, a tremor a fifth of a millimeter wide, the place where the writer paused to glance at the exemplar. The hand appeared in documents dated across 40 years. 2 writers then, a father and later a son, remained at the same desk. Then, 14 months into the investigation, that hand surfaced somewhere nobody had thought to look. In the defense exhibits of a civil lawsuit, in the chain of title underneath 511 East Carey Street, the 1961 deed on which Halloway Property Group's ownership partly rested, the one moving the old Tillman parcel into the chain the company purchased in 1987, carried the hesitation at the J. The deed was a forgery. Meridian had made it 60 years before Corrine Halloway ever signed a purchase agreement, and the family firm of her own trusted title counsel had done the making. And Carl Brandt had spent 2 full years strategically failing to locate the original deed, because the original deed was the single document on Earth that could expose 4 generations of his family's work, which meant the original mattered twice over. To the prosecution, it was the cornerstone, the genuine article against which every forgery could finally be measured. And to Halloway Property Group, though nobody inside that green glass tower knew it yet, it was survival itself, because Ellis had spent 5 months quietly tracing the Tillman family, and the heirs, 4 of them, among them a retired schoolteacher in Petersburg, had signaled through counsel that they would settle the quiet title action honorably if the truth was established and the original record honored. One sheet of paper that condemned Brandt and saved the building, both at once. Finding it carried Ellis into the one place he had spent 3 years avoiding. The Library of Virginia holds unprocessed accessions, donated records nobody has ever cataloged, hundreds of boxes deep. Meridian's working files, it turned out, had been donated in 1999 by a retiring secretary who could not bear to watch paper thrown away. 11 pallets, no index of any kind, except that in 2014, a conservator surveying the collection for mold had left a penciled inventory inside each box she opened, written in a small upright hand that Ellis would have known from across a football field. He sat in the stacks with box 214 open in front of him, his wife's handwriting on the inventory sheet, and read the line. Folder 9, Miscellaneous Recorded Instruments, Henrico, Chesterfield, Possible Originals, and beneath it, in the margin, the tiny checkmark she always made when something deserved a second look. She had touched this box. She had flagged this folder. 9 years ago, on an ordinary working day, she had left him a note without ever knowing she was leaving one. Folder 9 held the original 1961 deed, Otis and Pearl Tillman. Never delivered, never destroyed, kept by the forger's firm the way some criminals keep trophies and some cowards keep insurance. Authentication took 11 days. The paper, the ink, the recorder's stamp, the genuine signatures verified against the Tillman's war bond applications, and a church register from 1958. On the morning every result came back conclusive, Dana Whitfield stood in his office, looked at the deed no resting in its polyester sleeve, and said, "You understand this thing travels everywhere in a briefcase held together with tape. Chain of custody says it travels with me." She laughed, helped herself to a lemon candy from her own jar, and told him the grand jury date. This is the reason he never pulled the court order out of his pocket. This is the reason he turned his shoulders and slid past a woman in a cage door and said nothing at all. Brandt's office sat 11 floors above his head. One phone call from an indignant CEO to her trusted title counsel. One single sentence, "Carl, there is a man going through records in our basement," and 26 months of work would have started shredding itself before sundown. Ellis could not afford to be somebody. He needed every person in that building, and one person above all the rest, to go on believing he was nobody. The indictments were sealed on a Friday. The unsealing was set for the following Tuesday, 9 in the morning, coordinated down to the minute. Agents at Brandt's home, investigators on the 14th floor, and a meeting arranged through Halloway's stunned outside litigation counsel barely 60 hours before in a 4th-floor boardroom at 511 East Carey, where the Attorney General's office would tell the company what it was about to read in the news, and a vendor named Haynes would present a document. At 8:42 that Tuesday morning, Ellis stood in the surface lot 2 blocks away, in a coat that had been a good coat 10 years ago, and his phone buzzed once, unsealed, green. "See you at 9." He looked at the message for a long moment. Then he picked up his father's briefcase, 63 years old, carrying a deed 65 years old, and the weight of 19 families' stolen ground, and he walked toward the green glass tower. She smirked at the briefcase before she ever looked at the man holding it. She had been down in the lobby since 8:30, because it was investor week, because the lender review was Thursday, because the marble had to make its argument flawlessly, and when the man with the ruined briefcase came through her doors at 8:51 and walked toward the executive elevators as if he had every right to them, 2 years of jaw aches at 3 in the morning stood up inside her all at once and found themselves a target the size of a briefcase. 40 feet of marble. 11 seconds. Her palm flat against the brushed steel. The service entrance is on Canal Street. Whatever you are delivering, somebody down there will sign for it. I have a 9 o'clock, the single laugh, the phone raised sideways. The 2 guards crossing the floor, Otis Pruitt out front with his eyes already apologizing. The loan officer stopped where he stood. The woman at the coffee cart lowered her cup. Corinne pitched her voice to fill the whole atrium, the voice that had closed 9-figure deals, and she said, "Sir, you are going to open that bag, or you are going to open it for the police. Your choice." The revolving door turned. Dana Whitfield came through it at a working pace, gray suit, state credentials swinging from a lanyard, 4 investigators behind her carrying flattened evidence boxes, and the lobby fell so quiet that the fountain along the south wall could be heard for the first time in years. She read the whole scene in a single pass, the raised phone, the guards, the man standing motionless at the center of it all, and something in her face closed like a ledger. She walked past Corinne Holloway as though Corinne were a planter, stopped at Ellis's side and said, "Mr. Haynes, they are unsealing the 14th floor right now. Your meeting moved up. The boardroom is waiting on you." Then she turned to the guards, held up her credentials, gave them a floor number, a hallway, and instructions to hold the freight elevator, and the 2 men moved like the building had just changed owners. In a sense, it had. Corinne's phone was still in the air. She lowered it by slow degrees. The way a person lowers something they have just realized is far heavier than they thought. Her eyes traveled from the lanyard to the boxes to the man, and last of all, longest of all, to the briefcase, and the question escaped her before she could dress it in anything. "Who are you?" Dana answered without breaking stride. "He is the forensic examiner on a 26-month state investigation, and as of 19 minutes ago, ma'am, he is also the best news your company has had in 2 years. 4th floor. Your counsel is already up there." Ellis had not moved through any of it. Now he shifted the briefcase from his right hand to his left, and he looked at Corinne Holloway, at the marble armor, and the lender review, and the girl from Hopewell, buried somewhere far beneath both, and he said, "It is all right. I have a meeting." Then at the elevator, as the doors slid open, "You should be in it." The doors closed on her own reflection in the brushed steel. She did not go up. Not at first. Witnesses say she stood in her lobby for the better part of a minute, gripping her phone with both hands, while investigators crossed her marble in a steady stream, and the woman from the coffee cart quietly filmed it all. What that footage shows is a woman turning in one slow half circle, looking up at her own building. The boardroom took 90 minutes. Carl Brandt was in federal custody by 10. The deed, lifted from an oxblood briefcase by gloved hands and presented in its sleeve, did exactly what paper does when it is finally permitted to. It told the truth, at long last, to a room full of lawyers about 1961. Corinne drove home at 7 that evening and never made it inside the house. She sat in the car, in her own garage, engine ticking, door down, while the day arranged itself in front of her without asking permission. The parking access she moved in January 2 blocks, in the rain. The phrase "keep an eye," used twice. The email about loitering, written over a sandwich on a planter, the cage door she stood in, and the name Marcus, thrown at a guard whose real name she had never bothered learning, and one quiet sentence about a bag. It was my father's. She had built her entire life on being the one who gets underestimated. That was the engine inside her. The receptionist who ended up owning the office. The girl from the mill town with payroll, math in her head and solvent in her memory, who had sworn the most sacred private oath a person can swear, that nobody would ever look at her the way people looked at her father when he cashed his check in his work clothes. And she had looked at a man's briefcase and a man's coat and a man's face, and she had seen Canal Street. Worse than that, she had seen it for 3 straight weeks, in installments, with memos. She did not cry in the garage, because Corinne Halloway does not cry in garages. But she sat there long enough for the dome light to time out, and in that darkness she circled the one moment that refused to leave her alone. And it was not the lanyard, and it was not the boxes, and it was not even the boardroom. It was the elevator. It was a man who had earned every right to walk away from her, holding the doors open with one short phrase, "You should be in it." He had handed her a seat at the very table she had spent 3 weeks blocking him from. 4 times that night she picked up her phone to call someone, her counsel, her assistant, her sister, and 4 times she set it back down because there was no version of the story she could say out loud yet that did not require her to describe what she had actually done, and she was not ready, and she knew she was not ready, and that knowledge sat in her chest like a swallowed stone. The reckoning did not finish that night. It only opened the books. On Wednesday morning at 10 minutes past 6, Ellis Haynes wound a Hamilton wristwatch 14 turns and set it back on the windowsill, face toward the light. Nova came down at 6:40 with the sketchbook. The heron was finished. She had moved on to a chameleon because her class was voting on a pet, and she was running a quiet but disciplined campaign. She hummed while she shaded the curl of its tail, the wandering thread of sound rising and falling, and Ellis cut a clementine into 6 pieces and did not hurry her, and the kitchen smelled of oatmeal and pencil shavings. The boat needed its 9 minutes to warm up. At the corner of Brookland Park Boulevard, Nova lowered her voice the way she does when a question has waited overnight, and she said, "Amani's mom saw a video from your work building. She said a lady was yelling at you, and then the police came, but not for you. That is about right. Were you scared?" He took the turn, checked his mirror, and gave the question the respect of a pause. "No. I knew some things she did not know. Is that why you were not mad?" And there it was. The one he could not answer all the way to the bottom, because the honest whole of it involved a court seal and a forger on the 14th floor, and a fury so old and so patiently carried that somewhere along the way it had stopped being fury and turned into procedure. And none of that fits inside a Crown Victoria at 7:35 on a school morning. I was something. Mad is not the exact word. You can know somebody is wrong about you and still not hand them your morning. Your mom taught me that one. Nova weighed this with the gravity of a judge. Mom was smart. She walked into Patrick Henry Elementary without looking back. He watched until the door closed anyway. Dana called at noon, and he could hear the grin coming down the line before a single word arrived, and she said, "The AG wants you at the press conference." "No, I told him you would say that. I had money on the exact word. Pruitt in evidence owes me lunch. Also, the Tillman heirs asked for your name, and that one I gave them, because that one you do not get to hide from. That is fine." A letter arrived on Friday. Heavy paper, the seal of the Commonwealth embossed in the corner, 2 paragraphs of commendation above a signature that gets buildings named after it. He read it once at the kitchen counter, standing up. Then he opened the drawer where the Tatum tomato note lives inside its frame, laid the letter flat beside it, slid the drawer shut, and went back to deboning a chicken for Saturday's soup. She came on a Sunday, 12 days later, wearing jeans, which her own assistant would not have believed. Ellis was out in the front yard with a socket wrench reattaching the boat's side mirror after a parking lot in Petersburg had clipped it, when a sedan he did not recognize eased to a stop at the curb. Corinne Halloway stepped out, holding an orchid in a plastic grower's pot, roots climbing out through the holes, one white bloom open and two more on the way. She stopped at the edge of his yard, on the public side of an invisible line, and she made no speech, and what she said was, "My office has too many of these. They outgrow the sills. This one needs repotting in the spring, and east light, and less water than you think." Ellis set the wrench down on the fender. He crossed the yard and received the pot with both hands, because that is how Renata taught him living things and old paper both get carried. "Thank you." The screen door banged. Nova came out onto the porch, with the sketchbook under her arm, studied the visitor for a long moment with her mother's level eyes, and announced, "You are the lady from the video." The yard held its breath. Corinne looked back at the child, and she did not perform, and she did not crumble, and she said, "Yes, I am." Nova absorbed this, nodded once, and lifted the sketchbook. "Do you want to see a chameleon? It changes colors so things do not see it wrong." Something moved across Corinne Halloway's face that the security cameras of her own lobby had never once recorded. She came 2 steps up the walk and looked at the drawing for longer than any drawing requires, and when she finally spoke, there was hopewell in her voice, just along the edges. "That is very good." The tail, especially, she did not stay. He did not ask her to. At the car, she paused with one hand on the door, and she looked at the house and the yard and the man and whatever she had driven there meaning to say. She let it stay unsaid, which was, in its own way, the most honest thing she did all year. The sedan pulled away. Nova went back to her campaign. Ellis carried the orchid inside and set it on the east windowsill, 8 inches from a wristwatch. That night, after the soup, after the bath, after 3 chapters of a book about a mouse with a motorcycle, after the hum from Nova's room wandered its way down into sleep, Ellis sat at the kitchen table under the single hanging light with his father's briefcase before him, a small screwdriver, a brass spring, and a bottle of oil he had bought 11 years ago. He peeled the strip of black electrical tape away slowly, rolled it into a ball, and set it aside. The clasp came apart into 5 pieces. 63 years of pocket lint and graphite, and 1 ancient crumb of railway break room donut came out of the housing. He cleaned every piece on a cotton cloth, oiled the spring, and rebuilt it all in the order it asked for, working without hurry, the way paper deserves, and brass too. The clasp closed with a sound like a comma, opened, closed again, smooth as 1962. He sat for a moment with his thumb resting on the warm brass. The house ticked, the refrigerator hummed its one long note. Over on the sill, 2 faces caught the streetlight, a watch keeping time for a woman who no longer needed it, and an orchid that would want repotting in spring, which meant somebody around here was expected to still be going come spring, which was, he supposed, the general idea. He filled the thermos for the morning and set it by the stove. He packed a paper sack, 2 fig bars, and wrote the letter N on the fold. He walked down the hall, stopped at the second door, and stood with one hand on the doorframe, listening to the small, even breathing inside, to the held shape of everything he had not lost. Then he turned off the light and went to bed, so he could get up and do it all over again.